short and talk of laying the foundation. My name is Chelsea Lester, and I'm the exhibition manager at Philadelphia's Magic Gardens.
Yay!
Thank you. I'm joined by Emily Smith, our executive director.
Yay!
I'm joined by Isaiah Zagar, the and Julia Zagar. Hi.
Is your phone turned up, Julia?
Yeah. And while we're all clapping, giving a round of applause, let's give a round of applause for the Zagars for their 60th anniversary.
Is that of being in the neighborhood or?
No, being together.
This is their wedding anniversary.
Yes, their wedding
Coincidentally,
anniversary.
today is their
my wedding anniversary.
Oh, happy anniversary!
60 years.
Wow, aspirational.
Well, it's the day that Popocatépetl exploded.
Yeah,
Oh.
it's a big day.
Big day.
Because the Zagars' love story inspired a lot of this exhibition and inspired a lot of the places that they've bought and mosaicked and embellished in South Philadelphia. So a little bit about the exhibition before we get started. Laying the Foundation explores 5 different properties that the Zagars purchased and embellished on South Street and in South Philadelphia through mosaics and folk art and just all types of transformation that you'll see. This exhibition includes photographs, multimedia pieces, mosaics. There's a closet door that they both mosaic together. It has the beginning of their journey and tells the long, beautiful story of the both of them. So I'm gonna pass it on to Emily Smith, who's gonna talk a little bit about how we source all these amazing materials and how we really created this time capsule of their lives.
Yes, hi guys. So we're also going to say we're going to try and be so time sensitive. We are talkers, so if one of us is like waving, we're just going to respect time. So don't feel like it's rude. It's all good if we get interrupted. We're just going to try and get out of here by 8 o'clock. All right. We're going to try and sit by 7, so you guys have plenty of time for Q&A. So we're going to be here for about 45 minutes, and then we're going to sit outside together, and you guys have so much time to talk. So that's what we're aiming for. You can hold us to it. Okay, background on the show. So this, I threw Chelsea in the deep end. Chelsea's worked here for about a year and some change.
And she's amazing.
She's amazing. And she will tell you herself this was a challenge because this show was sort of, some iteration of it was rattling around in my brain for the last 3 years. And it took me somehow abstractly explain to her, there's all this stuff we have to show to people. And it was sort of living privately amongst the staff, and we're trying really hard to show that the Magic Gardens is just sort of a sliver of a very mosaicked, chaotic Zagar pie. And it's gone on for 60 years. I mean, actually, like, the love story starts it. And you guys just have no idea what any of it is. I mean, this is just scratching the surface. And the Magic Gardens, like we said, is just one site of many. So when you're looking at the work, you just have to understand. So like, for example, Isaiah gave us a binder of slides for like this right here. It's hundreds of slides. And this is just a small handful of like literally a binder this thick of slides that like have never been developed before. So these are all things. This is from a package of artwork that's about 50 pieces deep. It was tied up in 1982, never opened. And that was on a stack of 50 packages of 50 each in his warehouse. So we're still going through all this work. And like I said, it's like not even a percentage point of what Isaiah has actually made, so, which is crazy. So that's sort of the goal of the show, is to show you how deep this really goes and what we have here in Philly and how important it is. So that's kind of the background. And Chelsea very, she did it in a way that was, it's both educational and really cool. Like, this is a really cool show, so big props to Chelsea. All right, so I guess the first way to start is with South Street. So this wall is, and each wall is sort of either a site or sort of an era. Of course, this doesn't really capture anything about the South Street Renaissance, but as many of you know, a lot of you were part of the Renaissance. This was a decade in the 1970s. And we're not going to go too into, you could do an entire tour of the South Street Renaissance, but one of the questions that I had, so the Zagars moved to South Street in 1968, and they moved to this building over here, which we're about to look at. But one of the big questions that I have for you, Julia, where are you going? Come over here.
I wanted to look at that.
I'll go over there.
No, don't stay here. Both of you stay here.
Can I say something about this pregnant lady? When we first came here, we were pregnant. And we felt that what we were doing by beginning was nesting. And the nest just grew bigger and bigger and bigger. It included everybody.
Yeah, that's
Is that okay?
yeah, no, that's what I was just going to
Our nesting process has been very different.
I guess my question for you guys is how do you think that living on South Street and in this community has affected your lives and the artwork?
You're asking now,
I'm
before
asking
we're
you.
seated?
Yes, I'm asking you now.
Well, we had lived in 17 different places before we came to South Street, and we were only married 5 years at that time, or 6 years. But when we got to South Street, we were ready. I was pregnant, we were pregnant, we wanted a home, and we had looked first in the Italian market area. We wanted
They rejected us completely.
Anyway, we came to South Street, and we looked around, and there were places to rent that were falling apart, and so we knew that that was for us.
Also, we saw people like us.
It was an old Jewish neighborhood, old
Jewish neighborhood,
merchants.
but also a lot of art students around because of the art schools. You know, Philadelphia has more art schools per capita than any other city in the United States.
Wow.
So they were around,
And these two came by.
and they were renting, and they were places to rent and buy. It was very reasonable at that time. Very, you know.
And how does it, like, through the 60 years of being on South Street, how has that affected your work?
Everyone keeps, you want to.
I just remember that they kept coming to you, all the young people, and saying, what is that guy on?
And can I get some?
He started banging the house. We got a place for, how much was it?
$10,000.
Yeah, but we were renting it first
We were renting it first.
for $100 a month.
Only $75.
$75.
Oh my God.
They're talking about this building right here, 402.
We had to pay $135.
Yeah, yours was in much better condition. Isaiah started banging it apart, and he continued, you know. And then we bought it. We bought the building for $10,000, and he kept banging it apart, banging it and renovate. And
We
then,
started convincing other people to move in,
right.
that this was a renaissance that was happening.
We made that up, but you know what? When you think long enough and hard enough, what happens? It becomes real. And there were places, he came, they came. A lot of people came, and
They made a community.
we made it.
We made a community.
Yeah, it was exciting. It was really exciting at that time, the 70s. Everyone comes in and says, oh, I remember South Street in the 90s, and it was the best time. And then someone else said, I remember the South Street in the 70s, and that was the best time. But actually, it all went up and down, up and down. There were people. I don't know what draws people to South Street exactly, except that it allows for a lot of different people. A lot of different people, and a lot of, so it becomes a focal point for 4 different states, actually. Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and what's the other one?
New York.
New York, I guess. Yeah, and people come, and this is the street, you know, from colonial times that they walked on, and then and continue and continue. So it's always it always has its excitement, whether it's, you know, whether it's gunshots or whether it's push carts or whether it's motorcycles. Latest is ATVs, you know, that are running down the street. But you know, somehow people get work through it. We're working through it now again. So And, and that was way before the Magic Gardens. That was all before. It started, you tell me.
Well, yeah, so it kind of goes into the house, which is behind you guys. So this is 402 South Street. Has everybody been to 402 South Street, the former fire? Yes, everyone is a little bit familiar with it.
It's the Ice Gallery building.
It's the Eyes Gallery at 402 South Street. And the Zagars moved into this building, like they said, in 1968. They purchased it maybe a year or two later. It was a derelict building. And maybe, Isaiah, you can tell the story of when you started mosaicing and at sort of that time of your life and how that got you on the road of embellishment.
Well, I had, when I was 19 years old, I met a man in Woodstock, New York, named Clarence Schmidt, who had built a palace, a church, a place of spirit. And I was very touched by it, very moved. I felt my heart just jumping. It might have been that I have a pacemaker now, so it might
That was the story.
but something. But I also his hands, I watched his hands, and I thought about them, his magical hands.
And he was putting together.
What was he doing?
He was making more and more of his fantastic, agoric house and garden. And when we came to Philadelphia, I thought we should make a place where we could sell the things that we had collected in Peru. We were 3 years in Peru as Peace Corps volunteers, and we thought we could sell that merchandise in a place that was a folk art environment. And so I began transforming 402 South Street into what I call the folk art environment, which was the beginning of this. But you know, everyone in everybody's home, they do that. They make their home into a sanctuary. It's just that what I did was obsessive. It kept going on and on and on until it came here. And then it got fully blown.
There's a couple things I want to point out on this wall. One, that you can see the photo right in the middle, underneath the plexiglass of the bathroom. A lot of people ask, what was the first thing Isaiah did? So that image is the first mosaic
I like that Freudian
iteration of mosaic making. So Isaiah started without really knowing what he was doing, but he just wanted to make something special. Like Julia said, she was pregnant and he was banging away at the house, and that was sort of where he began. And then you can see there's another thing to check out, which is the patio, which a lot of people don't know is sort of one of the earliest exterior mosaics that Isaiah did. That whole patio in the mid-70s. So a couple of years after starting mosaicing, he did the whole back facade of the building. And then one of the other things that's really special that we have on this wall to check out is the door over here. So what's really interesting for us as we're kind of like uncovering some of these stories is that door is one of the earliest examples of a Zagar mosaic, but it's actually done with Julia. So all of the early mosaics were done with Julia. These are tiles that are made by Julia, and they collaborated together on this early work. Eventually, Julia had to manage the Eyes Gallery, make money, and also had a newborn baby and had to deal with being the mother to a baby. So she sort of dropped off, but really sort of pushed Isaiah and his vision. I mean, I think all of us know now an artist is only as good as the partner that they have.
It's true.
It's true. And it's really important for us to understand Julia hates when we talk about this, but literally none of this could have happened without Julia. And so she really pushed Isaiah, she embraced Isaiah and his work, and also sort of had her own vision of what to do and how to create and inspire and make community. So she's a really big part of it. That's why we love that door. Beyond the fact that it's really cool, it's also collaborative between Isaiah and Julia.
They say, we got a card today that's for our anniversary that said, a perfect marriage is two imperfect people who refuse to give up on each other.
That's so sweet.
Could I just add one thing?
Yes.
You two lived across or right near plate glass
Oh, right.
company, and they were going out of business, right? And there was all this glass shattered and pieces and all, and Isaiah got inspired by that and started with all that glass
And
then
mirror.
into the
Absolutely.
mosaics.
And can I add something too? Rick is standing in front of a picture of a bathtub. And that bathtub is a centerpiece of a painting of Julia with our son, our young son, Ezekiel, in the bathtub. And it's so big, so big that they're stuck with it.
It's over.
It's in the Snyderman's living room.
It's over, and it takes up
Magic Garden is
huge
stuck
space.
with hundreds of paintings that are as big as that and bigger.
Yeah. Well, we're not stuck with it. We're happy to take care of it.
We sleep underneath that painting every night.
It's
It's never given us any nightmares.
Well,
And the bathtub is still here. It's
I
upstairs.
know.
yeah, the bathtub's in our office.
Before we move on to the back gallery, Julia, could you share a little bit about your relationship to folk art? Because that was one of my favorite things about curating this show, is hearing your story about when you first got your big collection of folk art. So could you share that too?
I went to school in New York at Cooper Union, which at that time didn't give a degree. So I had to go somewhere else, and I could have gone to Yale, but I had gone to Mexico for a summer, and I fell in love with Mexico. I fell in love with color, I fell in love with everything. Oh my God. So I went back and finished my college there, BFA there, and came back to New York, and all I could talk about, of course, was wonderful Mexico. And then I met him, and what did I say was all about wonderful Mexico and all the people. And one of the things that happened to me in Mexico was that I was in a little apartment that I had rented, a little room or something. There was a knock on the door, and I looked down into the street, and there were 7 burros with a pack on each side of the burro, and a guy leading them. And he said, "I've come 7 days to bring your order." And I said, "My order? I never ordered anything." And he said, "Oh yes." And he gave me this receipt, and it was from about 3 years before. The people who were living there were from Swiss Green Stamps, and they had made this order. The guy made it, of course, but not in their time frame. People have different time frames. So here were these 7 burros filled with ceramics, and I began to think, what can I do with this, or where? And he said, "I can't go home." He said, "I can't. I need money." So I was like, I can't remember how much it was. I didn't have it, but I went around and I borrowed and everything. I think it was around $120. And I paid him all the money, and I got all these crates of ceramics from Guerrero, Mexico. And they were, and the Altepec, that's right. He remembered, because I tell him all the stories. And then, of course, what do you do with it? So I was coming home, I was hitching back to New York and got a ride from 2 French people in a Airstream trailer. And they put, remember we were talking about women, they put everything into the Airstream, and we went from town to town all the way back to New York. And in every city I went to some store that might sell ceramics, or might sell something, or might have and as we got, as we were going along, the pieces began to break. I was gluing the pieces in the back of the Airstream and putting them together, going to another place, anyway, we got back to New York. I had most of it was gone, and I had about 3 or 4 crates of pottery left. Of course, my family didn't want it because most of it was broken. But I loved it. I had gone through the whole trip with them, and I remember the little guy and so that was my first experience in buying and selling folk art. And actually still the pieces of Altepeck are wonderful, wonderful pieces. And they're much, much harder to get because they're so hard to ship. Still.
And still they break, and I get them.
That's what
Great.
Thank you. I think we're going to head to the back gallery just so we have enough time for the Q&A at the end.
On this wall is 826 South Street. This is the current house of the Zagars. Has anyone been inside 826?
Lauren.
A couple of us. 826 was purchased in, what, 1984? Yeah, 1984. This is a great photo to check out when you get a chance to see the state of the street and the house before the Zagars purchased it. What's really interesting about this house is, was this the third property you owned?
Third.
Yeah, it's the third, right?
Yeah.
And so at this point, Isaiah's like sort of figured out a bunch of stuff. They were living above, maybe not so
Don't
much.
believe that.
You didn't figure anything out?
I still haven't figured anything out.
They were living above 402 and then they moved eventually to 826 when it was done. But what's really interesting is like architecturally, this house is really, really interesting. And then when you talk about banging something up, you bang the whole back of the house out. There's this huge skylight that comes through the kitchen. It's a place that's really warm and inviting and seems to me like a very open door policy. Like every time I go over to the house, there's always someone that somebody brought home from something and they're just having dinner with the Zagars. And I'm sort of curious, like that, one of the things I really learned from you guys is like your openness, like your value system of really welcoming everybody and really being one of those hosts that says, no, come over, the more the merrier. Is that something that you grew together? Is that how you both were
I think
individually?
Isaiah thought if we fed him, he'd get them to work with him.
Okay.
And it did happen.
Is that what you think?
There's one of the people that came.
She was one of his first students who came and had dinner. Stayed 2 years?
4 months.
Oh.
But for decades still.
It's been over 30.
There's the other one, and there's Warren's piece up there,
Yeah.
the red.
Which one? This one? Yeah, this is one of the early Warren pieces. That one's been replaced.
In front of the skylight.
You got it, yeah. It's one of those things, I think, the house is fully mosaicked except for your bedroom.
Bedroom in the living room.
The bedroom and the living room. Can you tell us a little bit about the decision to do that?
It was a wise decision.
He would have taken everything. He would have taken every wall.
So you really said, no, don't do it.
Well, by this time we had a lot of friends who were artists and who we had loved and admired, and we wanted to show their work too. So where in the living room and in the bedroom. So that's how.
It is. It's filled with art of
Art.
other people.
Emily's pieces.
They have much of my art in the living room. It's very alarming when I go in. It's staring at me.
But so we needed some space.
Well, the kitchen has always been a place for friendships and joyous occasions. The kitchen.
Yeah.
Actually, South Street it wasn't a trafficked street at that time. You remember, right? We used to have festivals in the Woofy Bubbles used to blow up a balloon in the middle of South Street and everyone would get in. How many people? So it was like
Could
almost
be 100 people.
100
This
people in
bubble.
this balloon.
An architectural firm helped with that, the parking
Yeah.
lot.
And
had
we'd have a
dance.
community dinner. Everyone would bring food and everyone
We
would,
had
so
our
it was
Passover
kind of
dinners.
much, it was a different time. It was the 60s and 70s. It was much more communal. And there were a lot of young people around. You know, again, there are a lot of young people on South Street. They all have dogs and children. But at that time, a lot of them were coming out of art schools, and they didn't know quite what they wanted to do. And so they would, you could live very cheaply, so there were a lot of communes on the street, well, several communes, and people began trading different abilities. So if someone could do plumbing and someone else could do electrical work and someone else, and they put together a lot of these derelict buildings that way. And in the process, they reclaimed spaces for, like right out there for a park, for children. We had children, we needed a park. So everyone got together and cleaned off one of these spaces on 6th and South. That then became the fire house, fire station. But we cleaned it off and made a park out of it for children, or all of us. And then, of course, we all had to have a dinner there. And that's how it went. It all kind of, and the old people who lived there were very happy to see the street come alive again. So they would help. They would help with little things, like the deli would give us sandwiches, and a lot of little things happened that made it a very soft place to form a community.
There is a photograph of Isaiah sitting in the middle of 4th Street meditating with no cars.
He's having a picnic.
Well,
I was doing my yogurt.
His yogurt. There was a guy on 4th and on the corner, Abe, who sold outside. He would sell old food. And he would...
Didn't start off old, just he didn't have any customers.
And he would also grind horseradish. He was the only one who was still grinding horseradish when we got there, fresh horseradish. And we used to leave our children in the carriage asleep with Abe and say, take care of them for an hour. And we'd do whatever we had to do. And he became part of the community. And it was interesting that way. But everyone was working. It wasn't like... It was a time when we were looking for what we wanted to do in the world.
You found it, I feel like.
I guess,
figured
well,
something
Isaiah
out.
was already out there, but he was working from the time, from the time he started in the house.
I was obsessed. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was obsessed with doing it. Well, in a way I did know. I was imitating Clarence Schmidt.
Yeah, wanted to cover
And
everything.
imitation became a unique way of working. It manifested in a different way, and the garden is the proof of that way.
And there's isn't that one of the Isaiah working?
Yeah, this is Isaiah. But we could transition into the Magic Gardens if we
Yeah.
want to kind of move that way.
Yeah, good.
All right, so Zaya brought up the Magic Gardens, which is a really great transition. And it is really interesting that we have Laurel True here. Laurel is actually the woman in these photographs, right? These 4 photographs. There's a big one, yeah. So that is actually...
Laurel, could you tell your story? It's a good story.
Well, so let me just say, this was 1991, spring 1991, and that is, you can see the abandoned lots that would eventually become the Magic Gardens. And yeah, Laurel, maybe you can set the scene.
Set the scene, baby.
Hey, baby. So I had visited Philadelphia with friends in the winter of 1990 and went into the Eyes Gallery and up onto the upper floors, and I was just gobsmacked. I saw something there that I didn't know Isaiah had made it because I didn't know who Isaiah was. That was like something magical and transformative for me. And I found out from the person who was working at the counter, Julia wasn't there that day, who did this, like who's responsible for this. And they said it was the owner's husband. Do you want a commission? And I was literally like 22. I was like, no, I don't want a commission. But I took his card and then wrote him a letter and was like, I really need to come and learn this. Will you teach this to me? And so I sent him a bunch of photographs of my artwork, which he cut up and made a collage out of and added pictures of his own.
And then he wrote me a letter on this piece of cardboard that I had to open twice and turn around in a circle to read the letter that he wrote me that said, you can come, I'll teach you what I know. You have to find your own place to stay, and I can only pay you $4 an hour. And I was like, awesome.
I've always been a skinflint.
I'll do it. I mean, this was like, well, you did give me a place to stay eventually, right? In the cellar, in the drippy, yeah, dank. There was like this old couch. I probably wouldn't touch it today. Like, that was where I slept. I peed in a bucket, literally. It was real renegade. But day one, Isaiah said, I'm going to teach you everything I know today, because just in case this doesn't work out, I want you to be able to go away with some lessons, right?
With some knowledge.
With some knowledge. So he took me into this empty lot with tall grass, as you can see, and there was nothing on the wall. And I remember thinking, like, is this illegal? You know, like he took his paint and he wrote Philadelphia is the center of the art world on the wall. And he showed me how to stick, you know, the mirror and the tile, and he said, follow the letters, and I'll see you later. And he left. He left me there. And I was like, whoa, man, okay. So I followed the directions, and that was the beginning of the Magic Gardens, that wall.
She's a wonderful artist, too. She did a wonderful career.
Google.
I owe my life to Isaiah and his tutelage, and you guys welcoming me into your world. Yeah.
And you made a great dinner.
I made a dinner for them that they talk about to this day. I think it was chebujan. I lived in Senegal for a year, and I really like cooking, and I think I cooked them either a dish called chebujan, which is basically means fish and rice in Wolof, or I might have made you a peanut stew. I can't remember.
Peanut stew.
Yeah, okay. they were like, they talk about it all the time. Well, that's awesome. That's the
George
impression.
Monzo made the Senegal peanut stew.
Well, one of the things that's really, one of the things that's very interesting that we sort of are figuring out as we're kind of putting all these pieces together. Because like a lot of this story, Isaiah doesn't remember quite clearly. We find a lot of the clues through photographs that are dated. When we get a dated piece, it's amazing. But what's really interesting, so you guys have seen the Magic Gardens. This was starting at the same time that Isaiah was mosaicing 826, the house. He was mosaicing the wall outside here, you know, on the alleyway here that goes the whole length of this building. He was also mosaicing this building, 610 South 10th Street, and he was also mosaicing the Painted Bride Center at this time. So 1991 to like 1994, Isaiah would literally wake up at like 5 a.m. and mosaic. You worked on the Painted Bride. So like it's not just that it's the scale of the individual works, it's that he's also concurrently working on things as massive as that at the same exact time. So, and while he's doing that, he's making etchings and sketchbooks and paintings and drawings and working with folk artists. It is, when he says it's obsessive, that is, I don't even know what the word is.
Immersive.
It's fully immersive. all present, what is it, omnipresent? Yeah, omnipresent, like to the extreme, right? Like it's just all the time. And I guess my question for you, Julie, is like, what is that like, being in sort of this constant vision and movement? Is it something that you ever just...
No, it was good to have them gone. Thanks a lot. I mean, I had my own work. It wasn't like I was sitting around.
Yeah.
So I had children and I had work and
You had a business.
And I had a business, and it was good to have us have our own lives. You know, you need to have. Now it's considered good, but at that time, you know, now women have their own work and men go over, you know, but at that time, a woman should have been in the house taking care of her husband, but it wasn't like that. It was that we were both working, you know, and then we came home and there was time, but it wasn't, it was a frantic, our lives were work and home. That was it, yeah. It wasn't bad. Was it?
It was good.
Two imperfect beings.
Speak for yourself.
I also had a question for Isaiah, because one thing I also found really fascinating when curating the show is that a lot of these spaces are also constantly changing and transforming. So it's not like you would create the space and be done with it. As you can see in some of those multimedia pieces, the front of, or the doors would change, or you would go back and change things. Can you talk a little bit about revisiting work and how you know when a work is complete, or how you decide to make changes?
Well, I know you don't like me to say this, but my work was imperfect and it kept falling apart. So I had to fix it.
That's true, you could say that.
But
But that's not for everything. You go
no,
over things
I go
all
over
the time.
things. I go over things.
Well,
Sure.
you know, one of the things was that Josie was asking me, because we wanted to have, in our house, he was, making a home, but also doing all the mosaics, and we wanted a living room. So he pushed everything into one room near the kitchen, and we had that as our living room with a platform that we had brought in from Mexico, right? And then, of course, that became our dining room. So we had to move all the couches back into another room, redo that room, and he would begin working on that. And then,
But the key is that I was learning a process. I was developing a technique. And when you're developing a technique, you find that you have made things that can change, should change. And so they did, they changed. And in a way, that's been my modus operandi, that I had whatever space I had, I was willing to work on it over and over again. And so that's what's happening in the garden too. The garden has a preservation committee. And that committee does work that is a little different than mine, but yet it all fits in. It all makes sense.
Which you taught us, and I think that Isaiah's never been precious about the work in the way that this is the perfect tile placed at the exact perfect spot. It's all very spontaneous. It goes with the flow. If you need to put a window in, put a window in. Like, there's things about it that Isaiah won't necessarily say, oh, this is the best work I've ever done. The best work he's ever done is happening tomorrow. It hasn't happened yet. So I think that was a big driver as well. And also you needed space. Like, you would often go over things because you just needed to keep making and making and making.
And then I was buying things for the Eyes Gallery, and a lot of them would come in broken. And so he would use them. And then as using them, I'm just looking down here. So we went to Morocco, and these were tiles. We loved tiles. He loved tiles. So we bought a container of tiles. That piece of sculpture there was from Mexico, and gave him a drawing. 3 years later, I met the guy who said, I have your piece. I had to bring it back. And there were stories. So there was lots of things that were happening because of my involvement with the Eyes Gallery and our trips to Mexico and Peru that were incorporated into his work, just made it more interesting for him. Certainly a lot of the broken pieces, which you can see. But then he got the grant for the Kohler Foundation. You're talking about that?
No, that's a detail we probably don't have to get
So
into.
this is Morocco, but those two pieces with the airplanes on them are porcelain from the Kohler Foundation, from a grant, residency he had there. And there were more of them in the...
And people are standing on the floor with cutouts from a water jet system. A man named Dave Serbeck kept telling me that he had special things for me. And I kept putting him off until finally I did visit him and we became fast friends.
Wonderful. You know what a water jet is? You can cut a bridge in half with water. Just water and carborundum. It just goes shh. And this is marble, or some of it is. And you could cut right into all this stone with this water jet. It's
So the
amazing,
The Magic
amazing.
Garden has these drawings, and they can go back to Surbeck water jet business and get pieces made.
And they have.
We still do, we have an order in right now.
Nice.
I mean, I think it goes back to like so much of the work is it's important to talk about the collaboration, which we've kind of talked about. But you know, I think a lot of people just come to the gardens and they think it's just the Isaiah show, but actually there's so many other artists represented here. A big part of Isaiah's process is that collaboration, working with local artists, working with artists from all over the world. And I think that really elevates the space. One of the things like Chelsea and I have talked about is that so many people think of this space as a healing space. It's a space that a lot of people feel really welcomed and drawn to. It's very emotional, you know, and I know so much of your journey. Is there anything in there for you? Like the work, has it been, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like that journey of using art as a process. Can you talk a little bit about
Healing.
that? Yeah.
Well, I've had several times in my life where I've been deeply caught in negative thoughts, and tiling has helped me get out of it. But still, you get old. There's no way out of that. It's the last big fight.
You can still draw.
Yeah, you're still doing okay. You're still doing okay. Well, I think we're doing really good on time, which I'm very excited about. So can we all go and sit outside and you can bring all your questions and we can chat a little more? Okay, awesome.
Thank you all for walking through the space with us. I'm going to kick us off with a question that I'm curious about. So we both have transformed Philadelphia's art scene and our art world really here. So I just wanted to know if you all have a vision for the next generation of artists or my generation, and any advice for us.
Well, we see things. First of all, I'd love to say that you're beautiful out there. It's a pleasure to see you all. The art scene, the culture scene is always changing, always changing. It's a strange feeling when you can't keep up with it, but you understand that it's happening and that things have to change. So our time was, but there's a residue that we leave. And lucky for me, there is the Magic Garden, and there is that which is left and continues. That's magical for me. What happens next is for others, not for me. But I had my moment. And I did it. Whatever it was, I did it. I take responsibility.
We are just involved in community, so I don't know if it's the art community as much as it is just community. And out of community, it's like our garden across the street. Many flowers come and bloom, and it's wonderful. Yeah.
Does anyone have a question? This isn't super formal. You can shout them out or.
I do. Is the man you referred to Clarence?
Schmidt.
Is he in the photo that's in the little
Yes.
alcove? Okay. I thought
Yes,
so.
that's him.
A friend of mine was visiting here with me last year, and her mother had just died, and her parents had a photo of him in their house, and she didn't know who it was. So I think she came over and asked you, and after her whole life of wondering who was in this photo, you were actually able to tell her who it was. And she wanted me to mention it to you. Thank you for that. Her parents were artists, but they never told her who was in that photo or why it was hanging in their house. So you have a fellow admirer in my friend's parents.
remember this last year, and it was a lot of. It's a very strange photo that so there's a photo of Clarence Schmidt in a field. It's just a black and white. And actually, I think it's really odd because in my English class growing up, it was the same photo. And I think people think it's like Thoreau or something. Like, I don't think people realize that it's Clarence. We had a bit of a debate about it because we were like, how is this possible that everyone knows who Clarence Schmidt is? But Clarence had like a birthmark on his cheek, and it looks like in that photo that's there. So it seems like it's Clarence in these photos, but I think people don't know who he is, maybe?
I've been working on this birthmark.
No, but Clarence, what did you tell him about Clarence? He was a plasterer, right? You tell me.
I don't know what to say about Clarence.
We met him
Well,
up.
let me say something about the whole movement that is called outsider art. It's made by people who, the original idea was that people who had no art training, that they just did what they did because there was something that began them, and that was materials that were available to them, be it stones or shells or broken or bottles, whatever it was. For me, it was a basement full of mirror. That was my impetus to put mirror on the wall. So it just was something that people did. And there was a man named James Hampton who got a vision that he was to build a church. And he began working with broken down furniture. He rented a garage space, just a fairly small space.
Like a storage space, like a garage door.
And he began manipulating this old furniture into thrones where people could sit. And he made hats for the saints or the priests or whoever was going to officiate. And he built this whole thing up, and we know that he was photographed. He has a photograph of himself that was probably taken by an indigent who he bought something from.
You covered it all in tinfoil.
Everything was covered in tinfoil. Everything was covered. The old furniture was covered in tinfoil. And he worked as a janitor, so he had in a government building. So he had the use of all kinds of colored papers. And he built this thing up, and he would have, if he had lived, made it into a church. So it wasn't being made as an art project. It was a church that he was building. And he was going to officiate in that church. Well, we who understand a little bit more about human nature would realize that if he ever opened that church, he would have been brutalized. It would have been taken down. It would have been destroyed. But he had worked many years on the church, and he had closed the doors and was on his way home when he had a heart attack and died. He had that heart attack and died, and his family either didn't know anything about the church that he had built or wasn't interested. The man who was interested was his Jewish landlord. That landlord went to see what was wrong and found out that the man had died. And he looked inside this building, and he thought, I should call the Smithsonian Institution. This is something important. He sensed that. And two young curators came. People like Chelsea came. And they were blown away. And they said, what can we do? How can we get a hold of this? And he said, well, you can buy it from me.
No, pay.
Do you want to finish my story? It was 2 months' rent, $75 a month. For me, it's one of the most amazing pieces of environmental sculpture in the whole world. He did it with old furniture and aluminum foil. He made something spectacular. Yes, Ruthie?
So I want to ask you, is that the Kohler Museum, or is it?
No, it's
the
at the Smithsonian.
It is.
And it's
on
available to
display.
see. It's on display all the time.
But color is who.
But no one ever saw it during his lifetime. He never displayed it, he never showed it to anybody, and they only found it after he passed away.
What was his name again?
James Hampton.
James Hampton. There was another man named Henry Darger.
Oh, yeah.
Let's not go through the whole history of
No, we can't say it.
There's another question.
There was another man named Isaiah Zagar. But he was a fake because he had some education.
Yeah, it's very influential.
But he didn't learn anything.
Didn't learn anything. Mr. Muller.
Does anyone have another question? Hi, Sam.
Well, it's a question I get asked all the time on tours. It's like, is there, I guess, how much of it is mostly folk art versus local artists? Because a lot of people are always curious.
Folk art versus local artists.
Like, because I know there's lots of artists like represented here in the space. So I guess I'm curious, like, how much of it are like, how many local artists are in the space?
Well, there aren't many local artists. There aren't too many.
Oh,
Maybe 3 or 4 local artists.
like I know.
But there are many. But there are.
There's lots of tiles and I think more folk art though.
There's more folk
I
art.
would say more
Okay.
folk art.
But I don't think that has anything to do with anything. I mean, that's a question that's silly.
Well, maybe I agree with you, but I get asked.
Well, let's tell you something. So the chandelier is by Warren Muller, who's sitting right there, and these poles, kind of huppas, the huppa pole, was done in Bali in Indonesia from drawings that Isaiah gave to the artisans.
Well, that's a collaboration.
And Isaiah did a lot of collaborations. And in that little garden room, there are seatings made of bricks by Warren, what's his name?
Michael Morgan.
His class came, I gave him a tour.
What's his name? Morgan.
Michael Morgan.
Michael Morgan.
Michael Morgan.
Michael Morgan. I'm sorry, Michael.
Michael Morgan, who lives here in Philadelphia. And then there are people gave broken pieces of pottery that they made. Michael Biello and Warren and Karen Ullman and a lot of people from the clay studio would give their pieces of broken tile or things like that that they wanted to give to Isaiah.
But the mystery of a place like this is it needs people. It thirsts for people. It needs the people to come to it. It needs them to get dressed, get ready, and come and enjoy. That's the key. That the people and the work are co-beneficiaries. Yes. You know, we visited a friend of ours who painted these huge paintings. And she was living on 9th Avenue in New York. And she would bring out these long paintings in the hallway. And we could hardly be able to see them. And I thought they were magnificent. But there was one thing that was missing. They had no people that gave them this flecks of energy. This place needs that constantly. It wants it. It wants people to come and be here and to be a part of it.
You wanted that. That's why you did it.
Yeah. She got it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm curious, if your work ended up in a museum, is that not what you want? Would you want it to stay here permanently?
Well, I wouldn't mind that at all if it was in museums. I would love that. I would love my work to interact with other artists' work. Sure. I mean, I'm not an outsider artist. I'm an artist who has learned from outsider art, but I've also learned from what's called fine art. Is that insider art?
Mainstream, maybe.
Mainstream art? Sure, I've learned from mainstream art, and I do it. I mean, I go to art supply stores.
Yeah, I see it being on the threshold of the two.
Sure,
Yeah.
it's a bridge.
Yeah.
And it's always changing, always changing. The art world is always changing. The whole interest now is in art. One of my thoughts is that the interest in outsider art is because the museums are full, and they're not building new spaces for art to be stored. I hear from people who have wonderful collections of art that they can't find places to put it when they're ready to give away their art. You have to either have many, many millions of dollars or form your own museum. And in a way, that's what he did.
Yeah.
But it's because of a lack of space. And there is space because the whole, cities and spaces can be decorated, can be art sanctuaries.
Can I say something on that too? I'm gonna lean real close. It's really interesting because we talk about this a lot. How do you curate and show an art environment that is site-specific in any other context besides the way it was created? And this is, obviously the Magic Gardens is safe and will be safe forever, but if you removed the Magic Gardens from this site, would that completely destroy the integrity and the intent of what was made? In this world that we're in with other art environments, people struggle where the neighborhood wants them ripped down or demolished or whatever's happening, and we don't know. Do you try and save it? Is it, do you try and move it? It's a really hot debate, and it's becoming more and more prevalent because people understand these spaces more and more. They're less like, oh, this crazy guy made this, and it's more talked about in a sophisticated way. What's interesting about Isaiah is that there's the multiple sites, but then there's so much mixed media work that you could hang on the walls, and he's got hundreds of thousands of pieces of that kind of work that you could hang up in a gallery. But it's not the same as being in the site the way we are right now. And I think there's something really interesting about that. And the other thing that we talk about, Isaiah has 220 public murals, and they were meant to be out on the streets. And we talk a lot because one of the buildings we're going to lose is a 7,000 square foot building. I don't want to get into the Painted Bride too much right now because I'll start throwing things, but that's being demolished. That's a 7,000 square foot building, and people say, well, I don't know, maybe, for years, can you move it? Can you do this? And there's just a really big push and pull. The work is installed permanently on those walls. So it is kind of a funny thing, and you kind of have to balance both when you're working with artists that make this kind of work. But Isaiah, luckily, is like, he's got plenty of work. He should be in museums and in the streets. And the thing with the street is that it's open for everybody. Nobody is intimidated to walk in the street. Well, for the most part. You can, he writes, this is an open air museum. It's open, 25 hours a day, 8 days a week. So, there's something to be said about that and accessibility. So.
Well, also Kathy Foster, who's the head of,
American art, is it?
Philadelphia Museum of Art.
At the Philadelphia Museum of Art. What she said at one of the trials for the Painted Bride was that more people would go by, more children would go by and see, in this case, the Painted Bride murals that would ever come into a museum, ever. And they go on because they see it when they're in the second grade, they see it in the third grade, and they see it on, and they get different visions all the time they go past it. So this is a way of art reaching children, and it might not be art, it might just be color reaching children, or be tactileness reaching children. But she felt, and we feel, that going through the streets is an educational process. Yeah.
So, in light of it being your 60th wedding anniversary, I'll ask a question around that. So, Isaiah, I'm curious what it was about Julia that you fell in love with.
Buckle up.
Well, you want to hear it, so I'll put the microphone close to my lips. The first involvement with Julia that I had was a telephone call. And I immediately fell in love with her seductive voice. The second was something that had to grow on me. She had made a painting of herself naked in an abstract expressionist mode. It's actually here in the confines of these buildings. And she stood behind it wearing a black tutu skirt and tights. I fell in love with that picture too.
Made an impression.
And I asked her to come to my studio and see my etchings. I know.
It worked.
She didn't go. She didn't go that day.
Yes, but the next morning she came. And I made her a breakfast. The breakfast was terrible. Because my method of making a breakfast was using bacon grease that my friends had collected from their bacon. They had collected the grease in little canisters, and I would take them home and use them instead of butter. And I had in the eggs whole almonds.
What? But you put almonds in the eggs?
Oh,
They were
Julia, why did you fall in love with Isaiah?
Not then. I left.
Did you meet in school?
No,
Art school?
no, we were both out of school by that
okay.
time. But he did make me laugh. And I think that was one of the things that at that time I needed a lighthearted spirit around. Anyway, it was a long time ago.
But wasn't it a short time that you were together before you got married?
Yeah,
3 months.
3 months. We decided to get married after 3 weeks, and then it took our parents a couple of months to get all the things together and get it ready. So,
Did he propose to you? Like, what
I
happened?
don't
3 weeks
remember
in?
that.
Tell us
You
what
know,
happened.
we were laying in bed this morning trying to think of what happened, and we couldn't quite get it together.
Like 3
all.
weeks is very fast.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, his mother, I think, was very happy that he was going out with me.
She knew.
And
ethnicity.
she just thought that, anyway, and then there was the war, you know, people were being drafted, men were being drafted, and was it said then?
That's the way I got out of the army?
They said then that if you were, Isaiah had applied as a conscientious objector, and then Kennedy came out and said married men didn't have to go into the army, or didn't have to serve in that way. They could serve in a Peace Corps instead of a War Corps. And that's just what we did. So we got married and applied to the Peace Corps. So it's shortened, but. And we also made a certain amount of money on our wedding, which we were counting on too.
That's great. And you went to Peru.
And we went back up to Woodstock, New York, to after we were married, and then for what was it, 2 months, the summer, and then the Peace Corps gave us different places that we could go, and we never really settled down as a married couple to work. We went into the Peace Corps and worked, but never had a kind of settled life until much later. Yeah.
I was curious if you just talk about like how your Judaism affected, I guess just maybe your lives or your art, or just how maybe your upbringings inspired your art and whatnot.
Well, both of our parents, mine and Julia's, were secular Jews. So I don't know how much Friday night was an important night in my family because my father and mother made love that night, every Friday night, and it was after we had pork. You asked how it affected our lives.
all that bacon grease, right?
No, but we were brought up in New York City. He was brought up in Brooklyn. We were involved in not just Judaism because of our parents, but also immigrant populations that were in New York. Italians, Irish, Irish Catholics in my neighborhood. You were in more... Brooklyn. So we were definitely involved in ethnic communities, and also, this is many years ago, but we were the children of people who knew about the war, and we knew about Judaism, and we knew the stories that were told, and they were told in our families. I remember once coming into my living room and seeing all these men, Jewish men, sitting there and putting money into a circle, and I asked my mother, what was that about? What was it happening? And she said, it's being sent to Europe. It's being sent to bring people over. So you begin to absorb these stories, and then his father, when Isaiah you should say what happened with your father.
What we're thinking happened with my father.
When Isaiah started going for Hebrew lessons to make his bar mitzvah, his father was the one who studied. Isaiah was, and his father returned to his beliefs in a much stronger Judaism that he had been practicing before. And then our son, when he was ready to go to high school, wanted to, because his grandfather, Isaiah's father, was living with us, our son Jeremiah decided that he wanted to know more. So he went to a Jewish day school, and that was a kippah. And so he brought home his thoughts. So a lot of Judaism isn't the everyday it's just a lot of what you begin to know about culture. And there are different cultures, and we were certainly when we went to Peru, we became very interested in pre-Columbian cultures. So, and I don't know what you were thinking of by that question. Yeah.
Isaiah, a lot of your work involves narrative, and particularly narrative that tells stories about the artists that are important to you or that you think are marker artists in the world, in the history of art. And could you talk about that a little bit, because it's this narrative that is everywhere, the stories are everywhere, the texts are everywhere, and that story is part of a larger narrative about this whole human history, about making things, about creating things.
Well, even as a young boy, my love of the history of art in all its manifestations was very real to me. I felt like I was a part of something that's other than what we see. Another light, another world. And maybe that's manifested in here in the Magic Garden. Another light, another world.
Well, what I find interesting is that you're linking artists in ways that museums do not, or perhaps even cannot. So the lives of the artists are the lives of the artists. When you go to a museum, you see a certain kind of program narrative. And here you see this work as a living experience of art making. The people that are the artists telling the story along with you about those lives.
Thank you.
Who are the artists that you're dancing with now?
Unfortunately, I'm not dancing with any artists now.
Not dancing too much.
In your mind? Are they dancing around your mind?
Maybe they'll come back.
How did your parents feel about you pursuing art?
My parents were very open and happy when I was happy.
That's great.
Or even when I was unhappy, they were happy about me being unhappy.
Is that
I mean,
parenting advice we should take on?
Well, I'm saying that because they would go on with their lives and even watch me. I remember coming home from Pratt Institute all covered with ink and with an etching plate under my arm, and they were celebrating the Sabbath, and they just went on with their world. And when they spoke to me in the morning, they spoke to me as if we just had passed by each other, like you would say good morning or good evening. It wasn't a guilt trip at all. It was he's doing his thing. That's what he needs to do. Let him do. Let him go. What happened with my parents was very special for me. I was living on the third floor with them. I had a bedroom on the third floor where they had a bedroom. And I played Beethoven's 9 symphonies day and night for a while. And my father said, well, maybe you should move to the basement. Maybe. Take it under consideration. So they moved me down to the basement.
I've never heard that story before.
Yes, Sam.
I have a curious question because, like, since you're dealing with a lot of like different types of materials, have you ever hurt yourself in any part of the process of any of the properties of mosaics?
I never really hurt myself. I remember slipping on the scaffolding while I was working on the bride and hanging with one glove from the scaffolding. And I was looking around for a photographer. So I never really hurt myself, but some strange things happened.
Okay. I'm just curious.
I've been lucky. I've been very
Yeah, I was
lucky.
gonna say.
And also all the people that have worked with me, they've been very lucky. So I haven't dealt very well with that. I've just dealt like hanging off the scaffolding, waiting for the photographer, which wasn't too bright.
Maybe
But I had
it's
this-
so stupid.
Yeah,
Well, thank you.
but I climbed back up.
You had a lot of energy.
Oh boy. Now that I don't have it, I realized how much it was.
Are there seasons you look back on that felt like most poignant for you in creating?
There were magic times, I you know, in back of the Magic Garden, it links up with a church. You can see it from the inside of the garden. You can see it from here if you turn around. You'll see we're facing the side wall of a church. And my grandson was diagnosed as having leukemia. And I was working and crying. And the minister of the church, he saw me as he drove by. It was nighttime, and he saw me. And he saw me crying, and he jumped out of his car. And he said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "We're not sure whether he'll live or die. He has leukemia, my grandson." And he grabbed me by the waist, and he swung me around and swung himself around and around. And he said, Lord God, come down. We need your help, we need your help." And he kept saying that over and over and over again. He said, Yoel, we need your help, oh Lord. And he got back in his car, and he drove away.
And it worked.
Now, was that about art, or was that about something else? It was about the spirit.
And he's 24 now. I mean, he was 2 at the time.
He's a healthy young man.
Well, when you put yourself out the street, when you put yourself out, no matter what you're doing, you know, in front of people, there's always some encounters that happen. Usually wonderful encounters. You know, people are out to help you. When that same incident, when we were in Mexico, and we were telling craftspeople that our grandson was so sick, was amazing how many of them came up with their special prayers, their special artisan things, their special, anything that they could, they wanted to give us to help us, or to help whatever, and it worked.
They did it with the fire too. I mean, it was similar, like everyone's attitude when the fire happened.
Well, we woke up, I was making coffee 9:30 in the morning, and I guess it was Carol who called me and said, well, I just heard, I think the Eyes Gallery, I think Jim Stakes is on fire. It might not be too serious. We spent the rest of the day watching these 2 buildings and the whole street burn up. It was wild. It's really. And the firemen were so incredible. These young guys coming down and running into a building and not knowing what it was. And it was 100 degrees outside. And they had all this rubber on and tanks, and It was amazing. It was crazy. But luckily, we're here. So it took a while to get your senses about you, but it was and to understand it and what we wanted to do. So, but it's now a new space and a new world for us.
The sculpture across the street is a condominium for birds. And it was made by a man named Bill Freeland. And it's wonderful because the birds come here to take sand baths and to drink the water from all of the places that collect water in the rain.
And then they live over there.
They live here too. We have a nesting mourning dove right over here.
Oh, right. For years they've come, right?
The gardens is another place before you all get here. In the morning, it's like the birds are having powwows and the squirrels are doing stuff.
Especially that middle hallway.
It's chaos here when we show up. There's like birds.
When I was working on the garden, I would be working inside in this room adjoining the space out here, and I would hear these crackling of mirrors because I would be cutting mirror and I would hear the echo out here, and I thought that somebody was breaking mirror out here, and I would run out. So one time I ran out, and there was this little black bird, and that little black bird was making the sound of breaking mirror.
Oh, it was mimicking you.
And for several years, for several spring and summers, that crackling noise would appear as a constant with me working. And then, but I didn't think about it until much later that noise had stopped. So that one little bird wasn't coming back anymore. And nothing was breaking in the garden, even when he was here. It's very mysterious when you're in one place and things happen around you. The artist knows that. The artist is surrounded by mystery.
Is there any other questions?
Julia, I was curious that you were trained as a fine artist, and did you ever, I know this is your anniversary, were you ever resentful that you didn't have time to do your own artwork?
It's a good therapy question.
Oh, she's taking out her pen.
I'm gonna write this stuff down. The artist is surrounded by mystery.
Not really, because I became involved in folk art.
Yeah.
So the folk art became more important to me, and the not so much the the selling of it, but the seeing it and being involved with it and being part of their lives became very real, and I was became more interested in that.
Yeah.
And I saw that I could get a bigger girth. I could see more if I went into other people's lives, so folk art, outsider art, it's all wonderful for me to absorb. And so I never was in the fury that Isaiah was in to produce.
Right.
I didn't, in a sense, have that. It was more getting it from soaking in it from others.
Your creative process was different.
Right.
You
Right.
created a community.
Yeah, I did. I had much more of that. Yeah. Well, yeah, he did too in a way. Different. He relied on me,
Yes.
and I relied on him,
Right.
Right.
so it worked that way.
Europe and his parents knew back then that that was a good mix,
They did.
complementary.
My parents just thought, oh, she better get married quick. An old maid, 23.
Oh, my
I was
God.
considered an old maid.
Oh my gosh.
But my sister was 16 when she got married, so I really was. Anyway. Yeah.
You guys feel pretty good? Should
Thank
we
you.
end it?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.